What's up, boys? So I was at the gun shop the other day, and I was having a very interesting discussion with one of the gun shop employees about what kind of gun you would take to train somebody for the first time in how to shoot. So an introduction to shooting, they never shot before, they have no idea what's going on, and what kind of gun are you going to teach them on initially? Now, to me, this is a very different question from what kind of gun should you have for your first gun. Now, this is the FN 509 Tactical. This is by far my most recommended gun. When somebody comes to me and they're like, I want to buy my first gun, what gun should I buy? This is it. Because it can literally do everything very well. It can be a competition pistol, it can be a home defense pistol, it can be an everyday carry gun, it can be a leisure gun. It can do anything that you want it to do. It has so many great features right out of the box. You don't have to do anything to it. It has great sights. It has the accessory rails, great controls, just optics ready, just everything that you could possibly want this gun can do very well. The only time I deviate from that is if somebody wants something very small, like for pocket carry. And in that case, that comes with its own little caveats of like tiny guns are very hard to control and they recoil a lot and they're very hard to learn on. And that's what we're going to talk about right now is, like I said, this is a very different question because this is definitely the first gun that I go to when someone asks what they should get for their first gun. But I would not take this, and this is not the first gun that I would hand them at the range when I'm training them to shoot. I'm a firearms instructor, and we were talking about this, and he was saying that, yeah, he would just give somebody whatever he recommended for their first gun, just teach them on that because that's what they're going to need to use. Now, me, I disagree. When you're taking someone to the range for the first time, they have no idea what to expect. They've only seen really guns in movies. They don't know, even guys, girls, it doesn't matter. They're going to be afraid of recoil. They're going to be afraid of the loud noise. Guns are always way louder to people than they ever imagined that they would be, especially if they've literally never had any experience with firearms. It's going to be a shock. And even 9mm, I mean, we guys who have been shooting a lot, we're like, oh, I mean, this like barely recoils. This is a 45. This is a very popular gun. People buy this for their first gun all the time. When you take somebody to the range and you give them this gun, and I have had this experience where I was training an individual who wanted to be a firearms instructor, and this was the gun that he had that he wanted to learn on. His goal was to learn how to shoot, and he wanted to be a firearms instructor, and he wanted to learn on this. Now, this is a 45 ACP. It was very difficult for him to get over flinching, get over all that, and just work on like trigger control and just learn how striker fired triggers work and get his grip under control and stuff like that, and sight alignment. You have so much more to worry about than like handling recoil and stuff, and that's just going to muddy up the waters because that's all they're going to think about is the recoil, the noise, and stuff like that. So I always recommend, if you can do it, this is by far my most recommended starter gun for training somebody. Now, if you want to take someone to the range and you want to teach them to shoot, what this is it's a silenced 22 long rifle pistol. This will not recoil. It will not make a ton of noise. It will not hurt their hand. It will not scare them. You want them to have a good experience. It doesn't matter who they are. You're going to have an easier time shooting something like this and concentrating on the fundamentals and like, how do the sights work? How do they line up? How do I figure out, do I line up the dots? Do I line up the squares? What exactly am I doing? How does the safety work? How does a trigger work? Like, all right, so there's just like a bunch of stuff here, and then like that, then there's a like, how does all this work? They don't get all that stuff. So you need to teach them all this, and when you're muddying it up with a lot of noise and a lot of power and a lot of accessories and stuff like that, then you're just going to make it harder on yourself, and they're going to have a less enjoyable time. And then maybe they're not going to get into it as much as they might have if they worked their way into the water. So I like to make this comparison to learning how to ride a motorcycle, because I've ridden motorcycles my whole life. I'm also a helicopter pilot, and I'm also a hoisting engineer, and I've taught a lot of people how to use a lot of machinery and stuff like that. And motorcycles, when you go to motorcycle school, they do not give you a GSXR 600. They do not give you a Harley Davidson. They do not give you a 1000cc sport bike. They give you something very small, very low to the ground. It has very little power. It can't brake very hard. The clutch isn't very sensitive. And that's because you have all sorts of fundamentals that you need to learn and work on before you can get into. Now, obviously, your first bike is probably not going to be the little 250cc scooter that they give you to ride in motorcycle school. That's just not going to happen. But they understand that if they just give you a 600cc sport bike, which is what I would usually recommend somebody start with, if you're more timid and you're not used to stuff like a sport bike or something like that, maybe you should start with like a 300cc sport bike, but those are still plenty fast. And let me tell you, if you start learning on a 600cc bike, just like a little bit of blip on the throttle, and it's going to scare you, you're going to jump. People who start on 1000cc sport bikes, they'll go over a speed bump, and when you go over a speed bump and you're riding and you're holding the throttle, you'll do this, and you will literally go off the road. They have just so much power. I've seen similar stuff happen with guns like this, and when I was training the individual with the 45, something similar happened to him where they experience the recoil, they get scared, so the gun, they shoot, it goes off, it recoils, they get, every single time, they'll always let go of the trigger right away because they slap it when they're new shooters. And even though you can tell them to press it, hold it back, and they won't. They'll always slap it, and then they let go, and then he shot twice like that. And it was simply because of the recoil surprising him. He's all amped up. He's they're shaking a little bit. All of this is convoluting, just teaching him how take-up works. Okay, now you're at what we call the wall. Then there is a break. That's when there's a let-off. And teaching people all of that stuff is what you want to concentrate on when they're first starting to shoot. And then, once they learn how this thing works, you need to teach them how it works, what it looks like when it's functioning properly, what it looks like when it's not functioning properly, what happens, what do you do when it's not functioning properly, stuff like that, how the sights work, how you aim, what happens when you misalign the sights, where does the correlation between where the rounds will go and where the sights are, stuff like that. Once they figure all that shit out, then they pick up their first gun right here and they start shooting this. Then they understand all of that other stuff, and then the shock from the louder noise, the more recoil, stuff like that, that is just going to be taken by itself and not everything in conjunction. So that's why when you talk to someone who's new to shooting and you want to introduce them to shooting, yes, you might want to recommend something like this for their first gun. I would. This is just a fantastic gun for someone to get for their first gun. It's going to be fun to shoot. The controls are all big, easy to use. They're very effective. Like I said, you have many different sighting options, including modern optics. You have the accessory rail. It looks cool. You can put a suppressor on it if you want to. All of that stuff is great. Great magazine capacity, great holster selections, stuff like that. Like, you can do anything you want with this particular gun. And there's other guns like the M18, M&P 2.0, maybe a Glock 19 if you hate them. Like, all of these are great options to recommend that somebody get for their first gun. But when you bring them to the range for the first time, you need to own one of these, and you need to teach them on this. Now, even if you can't have a silencer, then just use this. The noise is so much less, the recoil is so muted, and it looks and functions very similar to these guns. But they'll be able to focus on the fundamentals. They'll be able to focus on what the gun's actually doing, what they're supposed to do with the gun. Safety is a huge thing. All that kind of stuff is compounded when you give people too much sensory overload, basically, is what's going on here. That's kind of the moral of the story. When you're learning to ride the motorcycle, same thing. Too much sensory overload. You don't want a loud motorcycle. You don't want a heavy motorcycle. You just want them to learn the clutch. You want them to learn the brake. Where is the clutch? Where is the brake? How do they feel? What do they do when you let them up too fast or you push them too hard and blah, 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 blah. What does the motorcycle feel like when you turn? Same thing with these. Your skills are going to directly transfer over from this to this. So I wanted to bring that up. Make sure, because a lot of you guys are going to be ambassadors of the firearms world, and you want people to have a good experience when they're first learning to shoot. And there is nothing more fun than a silenced 22. That is just cheap. It's enjoyable. It's safe. It's not intimidating, and people are just going to have a great time. And when they have a great time with firearms, they spread the word, and then they become ambassadors themselves, and then maybe they'll be instructors someday as well too. That's just kind of the circle of life, and having someone have a good time is more important than trying to be tactical and thinking that they need to jump from 0 to 100 right away. So yeah, again, that's my 2 cents on teaching somebody to shoot for the first time. What kind of gun would you start them with? Have a great time, guys. Enjoy shooting. Spread the word. Be ambassadors. Catch you later.